I stood in my mother's driveway in Barrie, Ontario, in February, with the wind cutting through my coat like it had something personal against me, 2 kids shivering behind me, and every single thing we owned stuffed into the back of a Dodge Caravan, with a heater that only worked on one side. I rang the doorbell of the house I grew up in, the house where I learned to ride a bike on the front lawn, where I had my first kiss on the side porch, where my mother told me I could be anything I wanted. And my mother looked at me through the screen door, looked at my children and said, "Elaine, this really isn't a good time." Then she locked it. My sister called me dramatic. My brother didn't even come downstairs. And I stood there on that frozen concrete step, and I said 5 words so quietly that only I could hear them. "You will all see." This is what they saw. My name is Elaine, and 2 years ago I was 51 years old and living what I thought was my second act. Not a glamorous one. I wasn't traveling through Tuscany, or starting a boutique, or finding myself at a yoga retreat in Tofino. I was living in a 3-bedroom semi-detached in Aurelia, with a kitchen that smelled permanently of toast no matter what I cooked, a backyard that got exactly 40 minutes of direct sunlight in winter, and 2 kids who were the entire reason I got out of bed most mornings. Nola was 14, sharp-tongued, funny in that quiet, devastating way that catches you off guard. Already taller than me. Already forming opinions about the world that I didn't always agree with but always respected. Declan was 11, softer, the kind of boy who rescued worms from the sidewalk after rain, and then worried about them for the rest of the day. He still hugged me in public. I knew the clock was running on that, so I held on to every single one. And then there was Garrett. We had been married for 22 years. I want you to sit with that number for a second. 22 years. That is longer than some people's entire adult lives. I married Garrett when I was 29, right here in Ontario, in a little United Church in Midland, with 63 guests and a reception at the Legion Hall, where his uncle got drunk and gave a toast that made my mother cry for all the wrong reasons. I thought I knew what I was getting. I thought I knew him. Here's what I actually got. A man who was perfectly pleasant in public and slowly, systematically indifferent in private. Garrett didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He didn't do anything that would make you point at him and say, "That's the problem." What he did was worse than all of that. He simply stopped caring, in degrees so small I didn't notice until one morning I woke up and realized I hadn't been touched, really touched, held or wanted, or even looked at like I mattered, in over 3 years. He worked as a site supervisor for a construction company in Barrie. Decent money. Union benefits. The kind of job that keeps a family above water in Ontario, which, if you live here, you know is getting harder every year. I worked part-time doing admin for a physiotherapy clinic. I handled insurance claims, appointment scheduling, filing, the kind of work that sounds invisible until it doesn't get done. Between that and running the house, and getting Declan to hockey practice, and getting Nola to her debate club meetings, and managing the groceries and the laundry and the bills, and the emotional temperature of 2 growing children, I was operating at full capacity every single day of my life. Garrett's contribution was his paycheck. That was it. He came home, ate dinner, watched hockey or scrolled his phone, went to bed. On weekends he went to his buddy's place to drink beer and watch more hockey. He was present the way a piece of furniture is present. Physically there. Functionally useless. I tried. I want that on the record. I tried talking to him. I tried counseling. I called a marriage therapist in Barrie, who charged $180 a session, which we absolutely could not afford, and Garrett went twice. Said he didn't see the point, and stopped going. I went 4 more times by myself before I couldn't justify the cost anymore. The thing that finally ended it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an affair. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't some cinematic moment where a glass gets thrown across the kitchen. It was a Tuesday in September. Declan had a hockey tournament in Collingwood that weekend. He'd been talking about it for a month. I reminded Garrett 3 times. On Tuesday evening I found a receipt on the counter for a fishing trip to Algonquin Park, booked for that exact same weekend. 4 guys. Cabin rental. Already paid in full. I held the receipt in my hand and I looked at it, and something in me, something that had been holding on for years, for a decade, for longer than that, just let go. Not in a dramatic way. More like a rope that had been fraying for so long that the last thread simply gave out. I said to him calmly, "You booked a fishing trip on the same weekend as your son's tournament." He looked at me from the couch. Didn't even sit up. He'll have other tournaments. That was the sentence. That was the one. 5 words. He'll have other tournaments. Like his son's face when his father doesn't show up is a renewable resource. Like there is an infinite supply of moments where a boy looks into the stands and sees an empty seat where his dad should be. I filed for divorce in October. I used a family lawyer in Barrie, a woman named Bridget Chen, who operated out of a small office above a Greek restaurant on Dunlop Street. She was practical, thorough, and charged less than most, because she believed that women in my situation shouldn't have to go into debt to get out of a bad marriage. I will be grateful to that woman for the rest of my life. Garrett did not take it well. Not because he loved me. I don't think he'd loved me in years, but because I was disrupting the arrangement. I was the one who made everything work. Without me, the house didn't function. The bills didn't get paid on time. The kids didn't appear at the right place at the right time. I was the operating system of that family. And I had just announced I was shutting down. He got cold, then he got mean. Not physically, never physically. But in that particular way that men who feel cornered get mean. Small comments designed to make me doubt myself. Telling the kids that mommy was going through something. Calling his mother in Sudbury, who called me and told me I was throwing away a perfectly good marriage over nothing. Over nothing. 22 years of nothing. That is exactly what I was throwing away. By November, the house situation had become unbearable. We were still living under the same roof, while the lawyers worked out the separation agreement, and every day felt like holding my breath underwater. Garrett had started staying out later, drinking more, coming home at midnight smelling like the keg and making no effort to be quiet. Nola was having trouble sleeping. Declan had started wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 6, and the shame on his face when he told me broke something inside my chest that I don't think has fully healed. I made the decision to leave the house. I know. I can already hear some of you saying I shouldn't have been the one to go. That legally it was my home too. That I should have made him leave. And you're right, in theory you're absolutely right. But theory doesn't account for the reality of living with someone who is making your children miserable. Just by existing in the same space. Theory doesn't account for the fact that my 11-year-old son was wetting his bed, because the tension in that house had become something you could physically feel. I chose my children's peace over my legal rights. I would make that choice again. The problem was where to go. Rent in Aurelia, even for a 1-bedroom, was $1,200 a month minimum by then. I had about $3,000 in savings. My part-time salary was $1,900 a month before deductions. The math did not work, not immediately, not without help. So I called my mother. Vivian Aldridge, 74 years old, retired schoolteacher, living in the same 4-bedroom house in Barrie that I grew up in. My father Harold had passed away 6 years earlier from a heart attack while shoveling snow. Which is such a Canadian way to die that it almost sounds like a joke, except it absolutely isn't. After Dad died, the house was just my mother and my brother Troy, who was 48, divorced, no kids, working remotely as a database administrator, and occupying the entire upstairs like he'd annexed it. My sister Camille was 45, lived 20 minutes away in Innisfil with her husband, and had recently become very invested in telling other people how to manage their lives. Despite having no children and a marriage that was, from what I could see, mostly about matching throw pillows, I called my mother on a Wednesday evening. I explained everything. I spoke clearly and calmly. I told her about the divorce, about the situation in the house, about Declan and the bedwetting, about Nola's anxiety, about my plan to find a rental but needing 4 to 6 weeks to save enough for first and last month's rent, which in Ontario you are legally allowed to ask for, and which landlords absolutely do ask for. I asked if the kids and I could stay in the basement, which has a finished rec room with a pull-out couch, a full bathroom, and its own entrance from the side of the house. I had slept in that basement 100 times growing up. It was warm, it was dry, it had a working furnace vent. There was a long pause. The kind of pause where you can hear someone choosing their words the way you'd choose which wire to cut on a bomb. Elaine, my mother said, I don't think that's realistic. I'm not asking for realistic, Mom. I'm asking for a roof. Your brother is here and he needs his space. He's working from home. It would be disruptive. Troy works upstairs. I'm asking about the basement. It's just not a good time, Elaine. You know how things are. I did not know how things were. Things, as far as I could tell, were a 4-bedroom house with 2 people in it, one of whom spent most of his day in a gaming chair, with 3 monitors and a headset, and a fully finished basement that was currently being used to store my mother's Christmas decorations and a treadmill nobody had touched since 2019. Mom, I said, and my voice cracked, just slightly, just enough that I heard it, and she heard it and we both pretended she didn't. I have 2 kids. I don't have anywhere to go right now. I just need a few weeks. Have you considered that maybe you're being too hasty about all of this? Garrett isn't a bad man. Marriages go through phases. Your father and I had difficult years too. My father, who had been dead for 6 years, who she was now invoking as evidence that I should stay in a marriage that was hollowing me out from the inside. I've thought about it, Mom. I've thought about it for years. I'm done thinking. Well, she said, in that particular tone she uses when she's decided the conversation is over, but wants you to think it was your idea. I just don't think we can accommodate that right now. Maybe you could look into one of those women's shelters. A women's shelter. My own mother suggested a women's shelter over letting me sleep in her basement. I drove to Barrie the next morning. It was February 7th. -18 with the wind chill. The kind of cold that makes your nostrils stick together when you inhale. I had the kids in the car because it was a PD day, and there was nobody else to watch them. I pulled into the driveway, the same driveway where my dad taught me to parallel park when I was 16, and I walked up to the front door and I knocked. My mother opened it. She was wearing her house cardigan, the gray one with the buttons, and she had a cup of tea in her hand, and she looked at me the way you'd look at a neighbor who'd come to complain about your recycling bin. Elaine, I told you on the phone. I know what you told me, Mom. I'm asking you in person. Look behind me. She looked. Nola was standing by the car with her arms crossed, chin up, jaw set, looking so much like me at that age that it almost hurt. Declan was beside her, holding his backpack straps with both hands, his nose red from the cold, his eyes too big. My mother looked at them, then she looked at me, and she said, "This really isn't a good time, Elaine." Then she closed the screen door. Then she locked it. I stood there. The cold was coming through my boots and into the bones of my feet. My children were watching me get turned away from my own mother's house. Then Troy's voice came from somewhere inside, muffled, like he couldn't even be bothered to come to the door. "Mom, just tell her to call the housing helps or something. I'm on a call." He was on a call. My brother was on a work call, and that was more important than his sister. And her 2 kids standing in -18 on a porch. He'd never paid $1 of rent to stand on. And then, as if the universe had decided I hadn't had enough, Camille pulled up. She was driving her new Hyundai Tucson, the one she'd been posting about on Facebook for weeks. And she parked behind my caravan and got out and walked up with that particular expression she gets when she's about to share her wisdom. "Elaine, I just talked to Mom. I think you need to take a step back and really think about what you're doing. You're uprooting your kids. You're leaving your home. You're making a lot of really big decisions based on emotions right now." "Based on emotions," I repeated. "I just think if you gave Garrett another chance, you'd see that things could work out. Nobody's marriage is perfect, Elaine. Honestly, I think you've been watching too many of those empowerment videos on YouTube." My 14-year-old daughter, who had been standing by the car this entire time, silently absorbing every word, looked at her aunt and said, "Her marriage isn't imperfect, Aunt Camille. Her marriage is over. There's a difference." Camille opened her mouth, closed it, looked at me like I should discipline my daughter for being truthful. I didn't. "Okay," I said. "Just that. Okay." I walked back to the car. I buckled my kids in. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and my breath making clouds in the cold air, and I said 5 words so quietly that not even Nola heard me. "You will all see." Then I drove. That night we stayed at a motel in Aurelia, the Lakeview, which had no view of any lake and cost $95 a night, which was money I could not afford to spend. But the room was clean and warm, and it had 2 beds and a TV. And Declan found a channel playing old episodes of a cartoon he liked. And for about 30 minutes he was just a kid watching TV, and not a boy whose grandmother had just shut the door on him. Nola sat beside me on the other bed. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" She was 14. She was old enough to know that the answer might be no, and she asked anyway, which told me she still believed I might say yes and mean it. "We're going to be okay," I said. "How do you know?" "Because I'm going to make sure of it." She studied my face the way she does, looking for the lie. She didn't find one. I am going to move through the next part carefully, because the truth is that the months that followed were the hardest of my life, and I am not interested in performing my suffering for an audience. I'll give you the facts. We stayed in the motel for 3 weeks. 3 weeks at $95 a night is almost $2,000. I put some of it on a credit card that I should not have used. And I will not pretend that was responsible, but it was necessary. I called my supervisor at the physio clinic, a man named Dennis Firth, who had been running that practice for 20 years, and who had hired me because, as he told me later, I was the only applicant who had actually read the job description before the interview. I told him I needed full-time hours. I told him why. He didn't ask me to justify it. He simply said, "I'll have the paperwork ready Monday." He also gave me the name of a rental listing he'd seen in the staff break room, a basement apartment in Aurelia, near Couchaching Beach, 2 bedrooms, $750 a month plus hydro. Landlord was an older couple who lived upstairs. I went to see it that weekend. It was small. The ceilings were low enough that I could touch them if I reached up. The carpet was the color of cold oatmeal. The bathroom had a shower stall so narrow that if you dropped the soap, you had to open the door to bend down and pick it up. But it was clean, and it was warm, and it had 2 bedrooms. And the couple upstairs were named Frank and Mavis, and they told me they'd had a daughter who'd gone through something similar and they understood. And they would let me move in with just first month's rent. I cried in the car after the viewing, not because it was sad, because someone had been kind to me, and I had forgotten what that felt like. We moved in March 1st. The kids shared a bedroom at first. Nola taped a piece of masking tape down the middle of the room and declared her side sovereign territory, which made Declan furious, and also, I think, made him feel normal, which is what he needed. I slept in the other bedroom on a mattress on the floor, because I hadn't been able to afford a bed frame yet. I lay there the first night listening to the furnace kick on and the couple upstairs watching the news, and my kids arguing about who got the top drawer, and I thought, this is mine. Nobody gave me this. Nobody can take it from me. The divorce was finalized in June. It took longer than it should have because Garrett's lawyer, a man from a firm in Barrie, whose name I won't say, because I promised Bridget I'd be civil, tried every tactic in the book. He argued that I had voluntarily left the marital home, which was technically true but contextually dishonest. He argued that Garrett's income was lower than it actually was, which the discovery process disproved. He argued that I was alienating the children, which my children's own words to the assessor thoroughly contradicted. I got primary custody. Garrett got alternate weekends and 3 weeks in the summer. Child support was set according to the federal guidelines, which in Canada are based on income, and Garrett's actual income, once properly disclosed, entitled me to enough that combined with my full-time salary, I could keep us above water. Not comfortable, not flourishing, but breathing. I want to tell you about what happened in the months after the divorce, because this is the part that matters. In August, Dennis told me the clinic was expanding. They were opening a second location in Midland and needed someone to manage the front office. Was I interested? The salary was $48,000, benefits, pension contribution, a Monday to Friday schedule that aligned with school hours. I sat in his office and I stared at the number on the paper, and I did not speak for about 10 seconds because I was doing arithmetic in my head. 48,000. After years of making 23. After years of Garrett controlling the money because he earned more and therefore believed he got to decide how it was spent. After years of asking permission to buy myself a winter coat. $48,000 and every cent of it mine. Yes, I said. I'm interested. I started in September, same week the kids went back to school. Declan started grade 7 at a new school and was terrified. And then within 2 weeks he had joined the robotics club and made a friend named Wei, who shared his extremely specific interest in building things out of Lego that were not on the instruction sheet. Nola started grade 10 and immediately got involved with the school newspaper, because of course she did, and wrote an opinion piece about the school cafeteria's lunch options that apparently caused a minor administrative uproar. By October, I had saved enough to rent a proper apartment. Not a basement. A second-floor two-bedroom in a small complex in Midland, 10 minutes from the clinic, with actual windows and a kitchen, with a counter that didn't wobble and a bathroom, where you could drop the soap and pick it up without opening the door. Nola got her own room. She painted the door purple. Declan's room was small, but he put up a shelf and arranged his Lego creations on it, and stood back and looked at it, and said, "This is a good room, Mom." And I had to turn around and pretend I was looking for something in the hallway. Because I was about to cry and I didn't want him to see. I didn't hear from my mother for 5 months after the porch. 5 months. Not a call, not a text, not a card. The woman who had called me every Sunday of my adult life simply stopped. As if I had ceased to exist the moment I became inconvenient. Troy never reached out. Not once. I don't even think he noticed. He was in that house, in his gaming chair, in his little digital kingdom, and his sister and her children were sleeping on a mattress on the floor 20 minutes away, and he did not send a single text. Camille sent me a message in April around Easter. It was long. Multiple paragraphs. She said she'd been reflecting on things, and that she came from a place of love, and that she just wanted what was best for me, and that she hoped I could see past the hurt to the intention. The intention. As if standing on a frozen porch with 2 shivering children, while your sister tells you you're too emotional is an intention problem and not a character problem. I wrote back, "Thank you for the message, I need time." She wrote back immediately, "How much time?" I didn't answer that. My mother finally called in July, a full 7 months after she locked the screen door. She called on a Sunday, which I think was deliberate. Returning to the ritual. Pretending the gap hadn't happened. "How are the kids?" she asked. As if she'd been asking all along. "They're fine, Elaine. I think we should talk about what happened." "Okay, your father would have wanted us to be a family." "Dad is dead, Mom. You don't get to use him as a spokesperson." A sharp intake of breath. "That's a cruel thing to say." "What's cruel is locking your door on your grandchildren in February. What's cruel is suggesting your daughter go to a shelter, instead of sleeping in your empty basement. What's cruel is 7 months of silence and then calling me and invoking a dead man to guilt me into pretending it didn't happen." There was a very long pause. "I didn't think you'd actually leave Garrett," she said quietly. "I thought if we didn't encourage it you'd go back." And there it was. The truth, finally, stripped of all its polite packaging. She hadn't been unable to help me. She had chosen not to help me, strategically, because she thought that if she cut off my options, I would crawl back to my marriage. She had weaponized my desperation. She had used my children's comfort as leverage. She had decided, in the comfort of her heated 4-bedroom house, that her daughter's pain was an acceptable price for maintaining the appearance of a stable family. "I understand," I said. And I did. That was the worst part. I understood completely. "So, can we move forward?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet." I didn't slam the phone down, I didn't scream. I just said goodbye and hung up and stood in my kitchen, in my apartment, and I looked at the fridge, where Declan had stuck a magnet from the CN Tower, that he'd gotten on a class trip, and I looked at the counter where Nola's journalism textbook was open, next to a half-eaten bowl of cereal, and I breathed. In November, a year and 2 months after the night I drove away from that porch, I got a call from a clinic in Penetanguishene that was looking for an office manager. The salary was $57,000. I interviewed. I got it. I gave Dennis 2 weeks' notice and he shook my hand and said, "You're the best hire I ever made. And I'm furious you're leaving." And we both laughed and I thanked him for everything. And I meant it in a way that he probably understood, but that I'll never be able to fully express. By December, I had moved us into a 3-bedroom apartment in Penetanguishene, walking distance from the waterfront, with a balcony that overlooked Georgian Bay if you leaned slightly to the left and squinted. It wasn't a house. It wasn't the 4-bedroom semi I'd shared with Garrett. But every wall in it was mine. Every decision about what went on those walls was mine. I put up photos of the kids. I hung a calendar with pictures of Nova Scotia because I'd always wanted to visit. I bought a small Christmas tree, and Declan decorated it entirely in silver, because he'd decided silver was superior to gold, and was willing to die on that hill. Garrett, for his part, had moved in with a woman he'd been seeing from work, a woman half his age, which is such a cliché that I almost felt embarrassed for him. That lasted about 8 months. He moved out. Rented a one-bedroom in Barrie. He takes the kids on his weekends. He shows up. I'll give him that. He shows up now. Whether that lasts, I have no idea. But for now the kids see their father and he makes pancakes on Saturday mornings, and that is enough. It has to be enough. I stopped expecting an apology from my family. Not because they don't owe me one, they do. My mother owes me one. Troy owes me one. Though he'd have to look up from his monitors long enough to realize it. Camille owes me one. And she is working very hard at delivering something adjacent to one without ever actually saying the words. I was wrong. But here is what I have learned in the past 2 years. And I want you to hear this. Really hear it. Because it took me 51 years. And a locked screen door and a motel room, and a basement apartment and a floor mattress and every ounce of stubbornness I inherited from a father who shoveled snow in a Canadian winter until it killed him. Waiting for someone to admit they were wrong is just another way of staying in their house. And I don't live in anyone's house anymore. Last spring, Nola's school had a year-end event where the students presented their independent projects. Nola had chosen to study women's economic independence after divorce. She'd done actual research, Statistics Canada data, provincial legal aid numbers, interviews with 2 women from a local support group, conducted with their permission and recorded on her phone. She had a display board, charts, quotes, data points, and at the very bottom, in her own handwriting, she'd written, "Independence is not the absence of needing people. It is the refusal to need people who have already shown you that you don't matter to them." I stood in front of that board in a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax and instant coffee, and I read those words. And I looked at my daughter who was standing beside it, with her arms crossed and her chin up, exactly the way she'd stood in that driveway in February, and I thought, she gets it. She already gets it. That last line I said, "That's yours?" "That's mine," she said. "Not from any source." I nodded. "It's really good." She shrugged, but she was smiling. I know. I don't tell this story because I want you to feel sorry for me. I have a job I earned. An apartment with a balcony. 2 kids who are turning into remarkable, complicated, stubborn people. A savings account that I built from zero. A credit card that I paid off finally in September. I don't need your sympathy. I'm doing fine. I'm doing better than fine. I tell this story because I know there are women listening to this right now. Maybe in this country. Maybe in a kitchen that looks like the one I used to stand in. Maybe holding a phone under the covers so nobody sees. Who are standing at some version of that door. Who are carrying kids and bags and broken trust and asking for help from the people who were supposed to be their safety net. And the door is closing. And it feels like the end of everything. It is not the end, I promise you. It is the very start. The people who closed that door on me are still exactly where they were 2 years ago. Same house. Same routines, same locked doors. And I built everything I have now from a motel room and a floor mattress and 5 words whispered on a frozen porch in Barrie, Ontario, in the middle of February, while my children watched me and the wind went straight through my coat. There is no sweeter outcome than that. None. If someone ever closed a door on you when you needed it open, what did you do next? Tell me in the comments. Because I think this community understands something that took me half a lifetime to learn. The people who say there's no room for you are almost always just afraid of what you'll become once you stop asking for theirs.